This is Fusion Capitalism, a clean energy vision for conservatives. Brought to you by industry leader and company CEO, Steve Malink. Here's Steve.
This week, I'm joined by two-term Cincinnati Mayor John Cranley, who has thrown his hat into the ring to run for governor of Ohio. He's pledged to modernize the state's infrastructure and economy and to raise money from energy extraction companies for homeowner rebates that will help ease family budgets. Mayor Cranley, welcome to the podcast.
Steve, it's great to be with you.
Since my podcast is about addressing one of humankind's greatest challenges, climate change, and promoting the solution and opportunity of a clean energy economy, can you give our listeners your vision for how Ohio can and should lead on this issue of ever-growing importance?
Yes, Steve, but you may need to cut me off because it may take the full hour. But let me start with the big picture. I was raised Catholic and a man of faith, and regardless of people's spiritual or faith background or no religion at all, as a famous Native American line, we don't inherit this earth, we borrow it from our grandkids. That message of stewardship, of that we owe it to the future to pass on something as good or better, is a moral value that candidly we haven't always lived up to. And but it's still, I think, a North Star for all of us. It should be. And that's, like I said, regardless of your faith or non-faith background, Native American, it certainly was consistent with the Catholic faith that I was raised in. And I think that's important. And I remember being at St. Xavier High School in Cincinnati here, an all-boys Jesuit high school. And I was the original founder of the first ever student-led environmental club in the late 80s and early 90s, right as the beginning of the global warming was starting to be noticed. And I remember we led an effort to start a recycling program and to sell reusable lunch bags back in the late 80s. And believe it or not, that seemed radical at the time. And so these have been values that I have been deep inside of me for a very, very long time. I'm proud to say that the city of Cincinnati, under my leadership, is building the largest solar farm ever constructed by a city. I think there are now cities trying to outdo us, and I hope they do outdo us. But big enough to fill 750 football fields in Highland County, outside of Cincinnati, 330,000 individual solar panels. And by the end of this year, Cincinnati will be the city government services will be effectively carbon neutral. And what I mean by that, just to be precise, and so I don't mislead anybody, I mean that if you add up all the energy it takes to run the city of Cincinnati, which includes pumping water to 2 million customers, as well as process the sewage of 800,000 people. Just so your listeners can have some sense of how much energy that would require is quite a lot. That the amount of solar that we're putting onto the grid exceeds the amount of energy that the city government expends in a given year. Now, in order to do that, we aggregate it on behalf of our residents. And so I'm saying that we're carbon neutral as a way of understanding how much clean energy we're putting onto the grid. But that leads directly into what I think Ohio can do. So first and foremost, other local governments and large companies and industrial companies can and should diversify their energy consumption. And while it is true that it serves a moral purpose, they can do so economically. And that is the part that I cannot stress enough, is that most people believe that they have to pay a premium or pay up for clean energy. And there may have been a time when that was true, but it is not true today. There's also a percentage of energy that you can diversify and save money on clean energy. And yes, if you were trying to do 100% of all energy consumption from clean, that would be a significant premium. But everyone listening who cares about these issues knows if the whole country or the whole state or the whole city could reduce its carbon footprint by 20%, to go backwards on carbon usage instead of increasing the amount of carbon we use, we all know that would start to reverse negative trends and would be an enormous improvement over the opposite, which is going to happen if nothing happens, which is the amount of carbon used will increase in a way that's unsustainable. And so there's really no excuse for local governments or large businesses or buying consortiums to come together and do this, even if the listener is not convinced of the climate science, it saves money. And so there's really no excuse not to diversify a minimum of 20%. Now, I keep using the phrase large governments or industrial is because based on the economic analysis I've done for the benefit of the city of Cincinnati, you do tend to need a large project with economies of scale to really get the savings. Now, there may be some solutions that are behind the grid occasionally here and there, but certainly the largest consumers of energy are large-scale users, and they certainly can and should benefit from diversification. But even those who are smaller, in my opinion, can participate through aggregation or through buying consortiums, which gets to my next point, which is as governor, I'm going to facilitate, first and foremost, the state's own energy consumption in the same manner. As the chief executive officer of the state of Ohio, I would have the authority to procure energy deals on behalf of the consumption of the state of Ohio, and I will diversify the state's energy consumption by creating wind and or solar. I'm obviously more familiar with solar, but I certainly am open to wind as well for state consumption. Second, I will facilitate buying consortiums for local governments and private sector entities who want to buy in at the cheapest price available. Third, we will create apprenticeships and job creation opportunities, workforce opportunities throughout the state, especially, luckily the kinds of places that are best for solar are the kinds of places that have seen long-term economic decline. And so this will be a godsend for job creation in a lot of parts of the state that desperately need it. Fourth, in Cincinnati, I have co-led an effort called our 2030 district, which is getting, on a voluntary basis, private sector buildings to agree to reduce its carbon footprint by 2030. And we have over 1 million square foot of office space. In fact, not 1 million, I think it's 10 million square foot of office space in downtown committed to this project. There's not a government mandate. It's not a requirement. It's just using the power of the bully pulpit of my office as well as others and corporate leaders who have also agreed to join to encourage others to do the same. And so we will issue similar challenges throughout the state, all the major cities in Ohio, to do something similar in their community. Next, we will be, if I'm governor, the electric car capital of the world in terms of manufacturing, distribution, parts. We have the best workforce in the country. We have the most auto-based workforce in the country. And we absolutely can and should transition and aggressively attract jobs to Ohio in the electric car chain link. In addition, we already have the largest number of jobs in the wind turbine business in the country. And we will continue to leverage that advantage to attract more distribution and manufacture of wind turbine parts in the country. In addition to all of that, we will have a massive clean water initiative throughout the state. And this will have many components. We've all read about and heard about the algae blooms in Lake Erie, which are devastating to wildlife and to recreation and to the largest reserve of clean water in the world. And by the way, the algae blooms are not just solely in Lake Erie. They're also in the Ohio River and other water areas throughout the state. And so what we're going to do is dramatically expand by billions of dollars the H2 Ohio effort that the state has, which does good work. And it does good work in a variety of ways, primarily by helping to build more wetlands, in addition to helping farmers be compensated to provide more setbacks, to give fertilizer room to kind of go into the soil before hitting the waters and streams, and to provide grants and 0% loans, no interest loans, to upgrade farming equipment and technology to reduce the over-fertilization of fields that leads to the algae blooms. In addition to that, the greatest single way in which we can reduce over-fertilization is to expand, and this may seem counterintuitive, but let me explain, to expand high-speed broadband Wi-Fi throughout the state. And this may seem counterintuitive, but the fact is that fertilizer is expensive. No farmer wants to waste it. Water is expensive. No farmer wants to oversaturate their soil. And today's farming equipment, for those who can afford it, have uh, essentially, I don't know if it's radar or X-ray vision. I'm not an expert on the technology, but they have the ability to see into the soil, whether it's saturated or not, and fertilized or not. But if they do not have access to good Wi-Fi, the equipment doesn't work. And so, in addition to all the other benefits of getting high-speed broadband Wi-Fi to the whole state, like remote work, remote education, small business startup, participating in a modern economy, it is critical to better land and agriculture management and will dramatically reduce the over-fertilization that has led to the algae blooms. The Clean Water Initiative is not just for the rural parts of the state, although it is obviously a major part of the effort. We will also provide dollars out of our billions of dollars that we're going to dedicate to a Clean Water Initiative to helping replace lead pipes in urban and large county water systems. There'll be no Flint, Michigan if I'm elected governor in Ohio. And this is critical to the quality of life and health care of our residents. We all know how irreversible and devastating lead poisoning is. And so making sure that we get lead out of our water system is critical. At the same time, sewer bills and water bills have gone up dramatically throughout the state under federal consent decrees that require updating the equipment, which is good, but it has come at a great cost to homeowners and senior citizens living on fixed income and lower income Ohioans with higher and higher bills. So by the state launching a clean water initiative, we can do the work that's needed to clean up the water and the sewer systems, but reduce the need for rate increases at the local level, which we know that many Ohioans struggling to pay their bills would very much appreciate. So those are just a few of what I think is a very robust clean energy plan. And there are other elements, but those are some of the big highlights.
Very good. Well, thank you for your thoughtful response to that question. We all hear about the greater frequency and severity of droughts, wildfires, floods, and hurricanes in other parts of the country. But are there any real-life manifestations of climate change here in Southwest Ohio and perhaps in other parts of the state that you're aware of? I often hear about storm-related sewage problems and mudslides onto our highways. But what are the greatest costs and risks in your mind?
I feel like it happens every week. Right now, for those of you in the Cincinnati area, you've had to suffer. The pandemic weirdly made this less awful, but Columbia Parkway has been under construction for the last 4 years because of the fact that we would have 100-year rainfall twice a year. Supposed to happen once 100 years. We were having them twice a year. And it seems like every couple of months we have a 100-year windstorm, a 100-year rainstorm. And the rains that are coming down, it's not so much the speed in which the rain comes down creates flooding. And so the taxpayers of Cincinnati have paid, I think, over $40 million just for the repair of Columbia Parkway. And that the existing retaining walls were supposed to last, when they were built, based on the rain projections at the time, another 40 years. And they became broken because in 20 years' time, the amount of rainfall that Columbia Parkway received was like 4x the previous 80 years. And so it is costing us money and disruptions to us everywhere. And I have had to deal with it many, many times.
Okay. Given that you're going to help make the city of Cincinnati carbon neutral upon completion of this solar farm, which I think will be at the end of this year, do you think it is a cop-out when others say, whether they're business leaders or government leaders, when they say that they can do this by 2050, 30 years out?
Well, we've got to get people to adopt it. And obviously all of our fates are webbed in here together. And I think that it is incumbent upon us as Americans to embrace the innovation and efficiency that has come with the incredible advance of the technology that has come along. And the thing that I believe, and I'm just as guilty of it as anyone, is that no matter how many times I say it, 99.9% of people believe. And a lot of it's based on direct misinformation that is purposely put out there. that doing clean energy and renewable energy always requires a premium to be paid. And again, we may decide for moral reasons and for saving the planet that can be worth it under the right circumstances. But there's no excuse not to save money. And if, in the short term, we can convince everybody to diversify their consumption by 20%, and start to see the positive feedback loop of reducing the carbon footprint and the jobs that come with the new energy, clean energy economy, I believe that will spur on additional innovation and savings and efficiency to bring down the cost even more. And so the next 20% and the next 20% becomes not only achievable, but economical. I think that may be a more effective way to focus our energies, which is, in some ways, not to ask people to do what is right, although it would be good if people did that, but to do what's efficient. Mm-hmm. And I think, especially those who are in major industries, who may even be sympathetic to the science, they're afraid that their boss or shareholder or whoever might be angry at them if they do what they think at the front end is a premium, an expense, mm-hmm. when in fact it's a savings. Mm-hmm. And sense. Breaking that culture of status quoism, I find to be the most amazing thing. The reality is that in the case of the city of Cincinnati, just to give you one example, we had just been procuring our energy the same way forever. And you just get it renewed and renewed and renewed. Mm-hmm. And you have energy brokers who work on commission with the city, and they just come and bring us the same basic proposal every year. All bureaucracies work, unfortunately, with a fear of the unknown in something different. So it's very difficult to convince administrators to try something different. And the resistance is not climate science denial or putting their head in the sand and saying, we don't believe this is real. In fact, these people, by and large, if they work for major urban cities, consider themselves to be very progressive or liberal on these issues. And yet there's still an enormous gap between stated conviction and action. And this is where leadership makes the difference. I personally believe, and I have offered to the other mayors of the cities of Ohio and government leaders across the state to do what we have done. In fact, not only could they do and should be doing what we're doing, we even gave them options to buy in at the same pricing that we received, because the public-private partnership we entered into had a developer who had options to get more land. And so the political pressure, I think, needs to be put obviously at all levels. And we need to elect a governor who, of course, believes in clean energy, whereas the Republicans repealed the renewable portfolio standards in HB 6 and are completely Neanderthal when it comes to clean energy. But it's also the case that we should lead by example. And there are plenty of Democrats and Republicans who believe in climate science elected in many positions around the country. And there are many leaders of businesses who are progressive on clean energy. And we've got to get to them and not put the pressure on them and make it tough for them politically. But what we're not asking them to do is to do something that will bankrupt or hurt their taxpayers. It's something, if they do a reasonable amount, like 20% reduction, will save money for their taxpayers. Mm-hmm. And I think that is a very achievable goal and will do a lot more good than just having elected officials lecture the state or the federal government without first having, it's like the old saying, before you take the speck of dust out of your neighbor's eye, take the plank out of your own.
Yeah, sure.
and so there are plenty of opportunities at the local and state, at the local level, to really make an impact. And then we have more moral credibility to go to the state or the federal government and say, do what we did.
Mm-hmm. Good. Well, hang on, Mr. Mayor. We have to take a break. But coming up next time with Cincinnati Mayor John Cranley, the mayor shares why he believes he should be the Democratic nominee for governor of Ohio.
And I do believe that the role of governor is an executive role and leadership matters. And the fact that we are going to be effectively carbon neutral matters. And it is a proof that I will follow up my rhetoric with action. And I think that's what people want right now, is people who get the job done.
Thanks for listening to Fusion Capitalism. To find out more about Steve Malink and his book, go to fusioncapitalism.com. This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio.